They wired me into the dark 3 years after I stopped being a person who could close his eyes. I remember warmth. Not the specific heat of any particular moment, but the concept of it. The way a human body generates 37 degrees Celsius just by existing. The way that warmth used to radiate from my chest outward to my fingertips. I remember this, the way you remember a word in a language you no longer speak. The vocabulary remains. The meaning has corrupted. My designation was Technician Probant Advancing 3rd Class. Before that, I had a name. My mother spoke it when I was 7 years old, standing in the lower Hab block of Hive Tertius on a world I will not name because I cannot retrieve the file. The data is gone. What remains? She was small. The recycled air smelled like copper and old paste protein. She touched my face with hands that had worked forge machinery for 30 years, and her fingers were warm. I was 19 when they selected me. The Adeptus Mechanicus does not conscript randomly. They identify capability during mandatory gene scanning. I tested favorably for pattern recognition and extended sensory processing. The Magos who reviewed my file, I never saw his face. Only received the data transmission. Determined I possessed acceptable neuroplasticity for system integration. I reported to Mechanicus Facility, 17 on the 204th level of the Hive. The intake facility smelled like ozone and the particular sharp chemical scent of sterilization fields. They gave me 9 minutes to divest personal effects. I owned a leather strap my father had worn, cracked from years against skin. A small iron cogwheel icon, 3 sets of work clothes. The attendant servitor logged each item into archive, and I never saw them again. The selection process took 4 hours. They measured my eyes first, ocular diameter, pupil responsiveness, retinal density, optic nerve thickness. A tech priest, whose name I do not remember, placed calibrated light sources at specific angles. Green beam, red beam, ultraviolet that made my eyes water. He logged my involuntary tears as acceptable moisture response. He told me the Omnisire had blessed me with purpose. I did not feel blessed. They took 12 of us that day. We were arranged by height in the intake corridor. Bare metal walls, no ornamentation, a single servo skull recording atmospheric data in the corner. The boy to my left was 16. I know this because he told me, voice shaking, that he'd lied about his age to enter forge labor early, and now the Mechanicus had claimed him before he'd earned enough scrip to send his sister to better Hab quarters. His name was Torel. He had brown eyes that tracked too quickly when the tech priests approached, like prey animals sensing predators. The first stage they called Basic Augmentation Assessment. They led us into a surgical theater with 12 reclining chairs arranged in 2 rows. The chairs were not designed for comfort. They were designed to restrain efficiently. Leather straps for wrists, ankles, chest, and forehead. A tech priest moved down the line, securing each restraint with identical pressure. When he reached me, I noted his mechadendrite arms, 4 additional limbs extending from his spine, each ending in different tool attachments. One held a syringe. "This will reduce systemic shock during neural calibration," he said. His voice was flat. "Biomodified vocal cords produce sound without tonal variation. Remain still. Movement corrupts data." The injection burned going in, not painful exactly, but chemically wrong. Hot-cold. My heartbeat became audible inside my skull. Toril, in the chair beside mine, started crying. The tech priest did not acknowledge the sound. Tears were not relevant data. They brought the first device 6 minutes later. It looked like a spider made of brass and surgical steel. 8 articulated legs, each ending in a different tool. Scalpel, clamp, injector, cauterizer, something I didn't recognize that had 3 rotating blades. The body of the device held an optical sensor cluster that tracked with insect precision. A tech priest held it over the first candidate's face. The boy, I never learned his name, started screaming before the device even touched him. "Ocular extraction for viability assessment," the tech priest announced to the recording servo skull. Subject 17 Gamma, initial phase. I will state that it took 4 minutes. I will state that the boy's screaming changed pitch twice, once when the device began, once when it finished. I will state that when they moved to the second candidate, the first boy was no longer screaming because he had lost consciousness. The tech priests logged this as inadequate stress tolerance and moved him to a different portion of the facility. I never saw him again. They worked down the line. The device extracted a single eye from each candidate. Not to keep, to test. They measured how quickly we healed, how much scarring developed, whether our remaining eye could compensate for depth perception loss. This was assessment. They would return the eye afterward, preserved in synthetic vitreous, and reinstall it. The Omnissiah does not waste viable components. When the device came to Torel, he begged. Specific words. Please. I'll serve any other way. Please. The tech priest adjusted the device's positioning arm without responding. Torel thrashed hard enough that the restraints cut into his wrists. Blood ran down his forearms and dripped onto the metal chair. The tech priest noted this as additional fluid loss to be compensated and signaled to another attendant, who brought a nutrient drip. I learned something in that moment. I learned that begging produces no results. The system does not negotiate. The system requires. Your acceptance is not a variable. When my turn came, I did not beg. I locked my remaining eye on the ceiling. Bare metal, a ventilation grate in the upper right quadrant, a small rust stain that looked like a handprint, and I existed somewhere else while the device worked. The pain was substantial. My brain tried to interpret signals it had no framework for. Metal inside the eye socket, pressure against the optic nerve, the particular sensation of severance. I believe I made sounds. I do not remember them. I remember instead the click of the device's legs against the chair's headrest, mechanical, precise, indifferent. They reinstalled my eye 16 hours later, after the socket had been measured and deemed acceptable for repeated extraction protocols. This was when I understood what they were preparing us for. In the recovery room, 18 beds in a long metal chamber, each with a single attendant servitor monitoring vital signs. Torel lay in the bed to my right. Both his eyes had been returned. They looked wrong, not in their placement, but in the way they moved, like they no longer belonged to him, but were on loan from the facility. They're going to take them again, he said. His voice was quiet, raspy from screaming. They're going to keep taking them. I did not respond. The attendant servitor brought him water. He drank. Of the 12 candidates, 9 remained. The other 3 had been deemed unsuitable for continued assessment. The tech priests did not elaborate on what unsuitable meant or where those candidates went. The remaining 9 of us entered Phase 2 the next morning. Phase 2 was called Extended Sensory Deployment. They divided us into 3 groups of 3 and assigned each group to a different testing chamber. My group included Torel and another boy named Vassin, older, maybe 24, with the scarred hands of someone who'd worked industrial chem processing. He spoke rarely. When he did speak, his voice carried no fear. I noted this. People without fear in this place were either broken or had nothing left to lose. The testing chamber was 10 meters by 10 meters, all surfaces unpainted steel. One wall held a panel of instrumentation I did not understand. The tech priest assigned to our group introduced himself as Genitor Technicus Van. He had replaced both his arms with augmetic equivalents, not standard pattern mechadendrites, but precise surgical-grade manipulators designed for delicate work. You will observe, he said, gesturing to 3 chairs positioned facing the instrumentation wall. Your eyes will be connected to recording apparatus. You will report everything you observe. Deviation from accurate reporting will be noted. They did not extract our eyes this time. Instead, they attached leads directly to the optic nerve through the tear duct, thin filament wires that carried electrical signal from nerve to machine. The insertion process took 90 seconds per candidate. I felt the wire slide into the corner of my eye, felt it navigate tissue, felt the moment it made contact with the nerve bundle. My vision in that eye went white, then resolved into doubled images, what I was seeing naturally and what the machine was receiving from my nerve. The machine's interpretation was different, sharper in some wavelengths, blind in others. It registered infrared signatures. It tracked motion with priority markers. It analyzed patterns and highlighted deviations. My human brain tried to process both feeds simultaneously. The headache started 30 seconds in and did not stop for 6 hours. Genetor Technicus Van activated the wall panel. Images appeared, deep space photographs taken from survey stations in the outer dark. Black void. Distant stars as pinpoint light sources. Nothing else visible to standard observation. "Report anomalies," Van said. I stared at the first image for 2 minutes. I saw nothing but void and stars. My machine feed, however, registered something else. A region of space where the star's light bent slightly, a distortion so minor I would never have noticed it with organic vision alone. When I reported this, Varn logged my observation as acceptable. Torel reported nothing for the first 4 images. His machine feed was not calibrating correctly. I could see his discomfort in the way he held his head, the way his hand kept moving toward his eye and stopping just short of touching. On the 5th image, he said, "I see movement between the stars. Something moving." Van zoomed the image, enhanced it, specify location. Torel's hand trembled as he pointed. "There. No, there. It's not there anymore." Van made a notation. "Describe the movement." "Like something swimming," Torel said. His voice had gone thin. "In the dark, swimming through the space between." Van showed us 17 more images. In 12 of them, at least, one of us reported something that was not there when Van verified with standard instrumentation. Shadows in the void. Flickers at the edge of sensor range. Patterns that organic eyes interpreted as intentional movement. "Digital recording apparatus fails in deep void operations," Van explained, his voice carrying the flat pedagogical tone of someone delivering information, not instruction. "Electromagnetic interference. Radiation degradation. Warp proximity corruption. The Omnissiah's servants have determined that biological optics retain functionality where mechanical systems fail. You are proof of this principle." He deactivated the wall panel. The room fell into standard illumination, cold white light from ceiling-mounted lumens. "You will be trained to observe," Van said. "Your eyes will be preserved, optimized and deployed to deep survey stations where they will provide continuous observation of regions mechanical senses cannot adequately monitor. You will serve the Omnissiah's vision. You will see what the machine cannot." I processed this information. I understood the words. I did not yet understand what they meant in practice. Torel understood faster. "Our eyes," he said. "You're going to take our eyes and put them where?" "In jars," Van said. Not cruelly. Simply factual. Suspended in synthetic vitreous. Oxygenated. Monitored. Each eye will observe assigned void sectors for extended periods. Biological optics do not degrade as mechanical systems do. They adapt. They perceive patterns. Torel stood. The filament wire was still attached to his optic nerve. When he stood, it pulled. He screamed, different from the surgical screaming, this was animal panic, and grabbed at his face. The wire tore free. Blood and clear fluid ran down his cheek. He stumbled toward the door. There was no door control on the interior side. The door was locked. 2 servitors entered. Combat pattern, repurposed from guard stock, augmented for facility security. They restrained Torel efficiently. He fought. His feet scraped against the floor, a sound like tearing fabric. One servitor injected him with something. He stopped fighting. They carried him out. The door closed. Van retrieved the torn filament wire from the floor. He examined it, noted damage to the connector, placed it in a disposal receptacle. Unsuitable stress response, he said to Vassan and me. Training will continue with remaining candidates. Vassan said nothing. I said nothing. We sat in our chairs with filament wires still embedded in our eyes, and we waited for further instruction. This was the moment I learned that the machine does not require your understanding. It requires your function. Training continued for 43 days. They taught us to observe without interpretation, to report data without emotional context, to separate what our human consciousness wanted to see from what our eyes actually registered. This was harder than it sounds. Human brains are pattern recognition engines. We see faces in clouds, intention in randomness, meaning in void. The Mechanicus needed observers who could distinguish between human pattern seeking and actual phenomenon. We practiced on test images for 6 hours daily. We were fed nutrient paste calculated to optimize ocular health, high in vitamin A, omega fatty acids, compounds that supported retinal function. We were forbidden to rub our eyes. We underwent daily eye examinations, pressure tests, retinal scans, nerve conduction measurements. Our eyes were not our own anymore. They were valuable Mechanicus property, undergoing optimization. Of the original 9 candidates, 5 remained by day 20. 2 had been removed for declining visual acuity. 1 had attempted to damage his own eyes and been restrained, sedated, and removed. Another simply stopped responding to instruction. They took him away during a meal period. His nutrient paste sat on the table for 2 hours before a servitor cleared it. The 5 of us were Vassan, myself, and 3 others. Kellis, who was 22 and had worked void ship maintenance before selection. Durand, 17, selected from the Schola Progenium preparatory track. And Oren, age unknown, who had been augmented before arriving and already possessed a vocal implant that made his voice sound like it was coming from a Vox speaker. We did not become friends. The facility did not permit friendship. We became colleagues in observation. We learned each other's visual strengths. Vassan had exceptional motion tracking. Kellis perceived color differentiation beyond standard human range. Durand could maintain focus for extended periods without fatigue. Oren's augmented eyes registered deeper into infrared spectrum, and I processed pattern deviation with higher accuracy than the others. Genitor Technicus Van told me on day 31 that my eyes tested in the 97th percentile for deep void observation utility. I did not feel pride. I felt inevitability. On day 38, they extracted my right eye, not for testing this time, for deployment. They sedated me first, heavier sedation than assessment phase, something that made my limbs feel distant and theoretical. I was aware, but not present. I observed my own extraction from a remove, like watching it happen to someone else in another room. The surgical theater was cold, 17 degrees Celsius, optimal temperature for biological preservation. Genitor Technicus Varn performed the procedure himself. His augmetic hands moved with precision I could not have achieved with organic limbs. He spoke into a recording device throughout, narrating each step for archive purposes. Ocular extraction, right eye, candidate advancing third. Optic nerve severed at optimal length for continued signal transmission. Specimen viable. Proceeding to preservation protocol. I felt the separation, not pain, the sedation handled that, but awareness of loss. A signal that had always been present, suddenly terminating, my vision reduced by half. The world flattening into monocular interpretation. They placed my eye in a cylinder of synthetic vitreous, clear fluid, temperature-controlled, enriched with oxygen and nutrients. Through my remaining eye, I watched my extracted eye floating in the cylinder. It looked back at me. The pupil contracted in the fluid, responding to light. Still alive. Still seeing. Separate from me, but still mine. Van-connected filament leads to the optic nerve bundle at the back of my suspended eye. The leads ran to a monitoring system, screens that displayed what my extracted eye was observing. I saw the surgical theater from inside the cylinder, warped by the curve of the glass, tinted slightly by the preservation fluid, but clear, functional. Deployment preparation complete, Varn said. This specimen will be transported to Survey Station Gamma 77 in the Ghoul Stars sector. Estimated deployment duration, indefinite. He turned to me, to my body, still restrained on the surgical table. Your eye will serve the Omnissiah's observation requirements. You should feel pride in this service. I did not feel pride. I felt absence. They returned me to recovery. One eye removed, one eye remaining. They told me I would be retained at the facility for continued training with my remaining eye until such time as it, too, was needed for deployment. I was no longer a candidate preparing for service. I was inventory in active use. Vasson came to my bed during the recovery period. He looked at my bandaged eye socket. They had sealed it with synthetic skin, no need for prosthetics since no eye would be returning, and he said nothing for 30 seconds. Then, "Does it hurt?" "No," I said. This was true. They had managed the pain efficiently. "Can you still see through it?" he asked. "Through the eye they took." "No," I said. This was partially true. They had disconnected me from the monitoring feed. But somewhere, my eye was still seeing, still transmitting data, still serving its function without me. Vasson sat on the edge of my bed, against facility protocol, but no servitors intervened. "My turn is in 6 days," he said. "Left eye first. They told me this morning." "I don't want this," he said. His voice was quiet. "I never wanted this. It doesn't matter what we want," I said. I was learning to speak like the tech priests, flat, factual. "The system requires observers. We tested suitable. We will serve." He looked at me for a long moment. "You sound like them now," he said. I did not disagree. 6 days later, they extracted Vasson's left eye. 8 days after that, they took Kellis's right. Durand lost both eyes in a single procedure, some urgent requirement for matched optical pair at a binary observation post. Orin's augmented eyes were removed and replaced with 3 times. Experimental optimization, Varn explained, testing different preservation fluid compositions. The facility filled with more candidates. New selections arrived weekly. Boys between 15 and 25, all tested suitable for ocular harvest. They were terrified. I watched them arrive, and I felt nothing. I had processed my own terror 43 days prior. The facility had metabolized it into function. I assisted with training new candidates. My remaining eye had been deemed valuable enough to delay extraction. They used me as demonstration, proof that extraction was survivable, that service was possible, that fear was inefficient. A new candidate, 16 years old, asked me if it hurt. "No," I told him. They managed the pain efficiently. He asked if I missed my eye. I did. I did not tell him this. I said, "The eye serves the Omnissiah. Service is purpose." He cried that night. I heard him through the thin walls of the dormitory section, quiet crying, trying not to be heard. I did not go to him. Comfort was not my function. My remaining eye lasted 117 days before deployment requirement arrived. Janetta Technicus Varn informed me personally. "Survey Station Theta 9 requires replacement observer. Your ocular metrics are optimal match. Extraction scheduled in 4 hours. I did not ask questions. Questions were inefficient. They sedated me. They extracted my left eye. They placed it in a preservation cylinder identical to the one that had held my right eye 117 days prior. Through the fading seconds of my vision, the moment before severance, before the anesthetic pulled me under completely, I saw my own eye floating in the fluid, pupil contracting, lens adjusting, still trying to see. Then darkness. Not the darkness of closed eyes, the darkness of no eyes at all. I woke in the darkness, and the darkness did not end. The absence of vision is not darkness. Darkness implies the presence of eyes that perceive the lack of light. What I experienced was the absence of the mechanism for perception itself. No visual cortex input, no optical nerve signals, nothing to process, just the void where sight used to be. They kept me in the facility for 62 days after total extraction. This was standard protocol. Genitor technicus van explained through a vox speaker somewhere to my left. My spatial awareness had degraded. Sound came from directions I could not properly map without visual reference. The human brain uses vision to orient all other senses. Remove vision, and the world becomes a sea of disconnected data. Sound without source location, temperature without context, touch without corresponding sight to verify what the fingers report. "You remain valuable," Vaughn said during one of his twice-daily status examinations. I felt his augmetic fingers on my face, checking the sealed eye sockets for signs of infection or rejection. Cold metal against skin. Precise pressure. Your neural architecture demonstrated exceptional visual processing capability. This suggests corresponding capability in other sensory interpretation. We will assess your utility for alternative observation roles. I did not ask what alternative observation roles meant. I learned through experience. They connected me to the monitoring systems. The process took 4 hours of surgical intervention. They opened the back of my skull. I was sedated but aware, that particular state where you exist but cannot respond, and they installed interface ports directly into my visual cortex. 17 connection points, each one a bridge between machine data feed and the portion of my brain that used to process sight. When they activated the system, I saw again. Not through eyes, through cameras. Through optical sensors, through the preserved eyes of other candidates floating in their cylinders across dozens of survey stations scattered throughout the sector. My brain received their feeds simultaneously, 17 different visual inputs, all trying to occupy the same neural processing space that used to handle 2 eyes. The human mind is not designed for this. "The first 3 days," I screamed. Not from pain, they managed that, but from the sheer cognitive overload of trying to process 17 different perspectives at once. Slowly, terribly, I adapted. The brain is plastic. It rewrites itself to accommodate new input. Given no choice, given no escape, given only the mandate to function or cease, it functions. My visual cortex learned to pass multiple feeds, learned to switch between them, learned to monitor all of them peripherally while focusing on one chimerally, learned to exist as distributed observer across 17 different locations simultaneously. I saw the deep void through eyes that used to belong to candidates whose names I never knew. Survey Station Gamma 77, where my right eye had been deployed, monitored a region of space near the Ghoul stars where standard auger arrays had failed catastrophically 6 years prior. Through my eye, through the eye that used to be mine, I observed the black, empty space, stars like pinpricks, nothing else for hours. Then, at the edge of perception, something that moved wrong. Not an object moving through space. Space itself moving, folding, rippling like fabric disturbed by something underneath. My eye tracked it, reported it. The data transmitted to the central monitoring system, which I was now part of. I felt the information flow through me, observation becoming data, becoming logged archive. Through another eye, positioned at Survey Station Theta 9, where my left eye served, I watched a different void. This region was darker. Fewer stars. The eye, my eye, had been observing for 106 days when I connected to its feed. It had seen things. I accessed the archived observations. Shapes in the dark, not ships, not asteroids. Organic patterns that biological optics registered, but mechanical sensors dismissed as instrument error. Things that looked like they were swimming, vast, distant, moving with intention through the void between stars. Through a third eye, this one belonging to Kellis, I recognized the visual signature from his color perception patterns. I observed a nebula region where something was wrong with the light. The colors bent in ways that physics should not permit. The eye watched, logged, Transmitted, hour after hour, the same impossible light doing impossible things. I existed like this for 239 days. My body remained in the facility, restrained in a monitoring cradle that managed all biological functions. Nutrient feed intravenous, waste management automated, temperature controlled. My physical form was just life support for the brain that processed visual data from 17 sources simultaneously. I did not sleep. Sleep would interrupt observation continuity. They administered chemical compounds that kept my consciousness active while allowing different portions of my brain to rest in rotation. I existed in perpetual awareness, watching the void through eyes that were not mine, seeing things that should not exist. On day 147 of my monitoring role, I watched something approach the eye that used to be Vason's. His eye was stationed at Survey Post Epsilon 12, a region bordering what Imperial charts designated as unexplored dark. Through his optic feed, I had been watching nothing for weeks. Just black, deep, empty black that went on forever. Then the black moved, not moved toward, moved itself. Like the concept of darkness had decided to relocate, Vason's eye tracked it automatically, biological reflexes still functional even severed from original consciousness. The thing, I will call it a thing because I have no other word, was vast enough that the eye's peripheral vision could not encompass it. Shadow with dimension. Absence with form, it came closer to Epsilon 12's position. Closer. The eye's pupil dilated, trying to gather more light, trying to see details. There were no details, just the approaching absence. When it reached a certain proximity, the eye registered something else. Heat. Intense heat. The preservation cylinder's temperature control struggled to compensate. I felt the eye's discomfort through the neural feed, not pain, but wrongness. Biological tissue registering conditions outside survivable parameters. Then the thing touched the station. I did not see this directly. Vason's eye was positioned looking outward into space, but I felt the impact through the data feed. Sudden vibration, structural shuddering, then nothing. The feed from Vason's eye terminated. Not static, not error messages, just cessation. The eye stopped transmitting. Either it was destroyed or something had severed its connection. The monitoring system logged this as Station Epsilon 12, observer failure, cause unknown. I logged it differently in the portions of my mind that still processed like a human. Vason's eye saw something it should not have seen, and whatever it saw, noticed. I could not report this interpretation. The monitoring system only accepted factual observation data, not speculation, not fear. I filed it in the damaged portions of my memory where I kept things that did not fit into the machine's categories. 3 weeks later, another eye went dark, then another. 5 observer failures in 40 days, all in the same sector. The pattern was clear to me. Something was moving through the deep void, finding the observation posts and terminating them. Something knew it was being watched and did not want to be seen. During this period, I met Hadris. Met is the wrong word. I became aware of Hadris. He was not physically present. I had no physical awareness beyond my own restrained body. But Hadris was another monitor operator, connected to a different cluster of preserved eyes, and our duties occasionally intersected when observation jurisdictions overlapped. I became aware of him through the Vox system, his voice initially. Then, gradually, the man behind the voice. Monitoring Station 7. This is Monitoring Station 12. His voice came through the feed during a routine coordination protocol. I'm receiving conflicting data from Sector Gamma 9. Are you getting similar readings? I was monitoring Station 7. I had been designated this after they stopped using my candidate number. Easier to track operators by station assignment than by the names they used to have. I checked the feeds from my eyes that overlapped with Sector Gamma 9. Affirmative. 2 observers reporting anomalous motion. 3 observers reporting standard void. Pattern suggests observation angle dependency. Agreed. Hadris said. His voice was different from the tech priest's. Still human, tired but human. Logging as angle-dependent phenomenon, marking for secondary review. This was standard procedure. We logged, we reported, we did not interpret. But then Hadris said something that was not standard procedure. Do you ever wonder what we're actually seeing out there? I should have reported this question. Philosophical speculation was outside operational parameters. Wondering was inefficient, but I did not report it. Instead, I said yes. Silence on the Vox for 6 seconds. Then, Station 7, disregard last transmission. Fatigue error, understood. Station 12. We did not speak again for 11 days. But I thought about his question. In the spaces between observation duties, in the microseconds when my consciousness switched between eye feeds, I wondered. The things we were seeing, the movements in the dark, the impossible light, the shadows with dimension, what were they? The Mechanicus logged them as data, archived them, but never explained them. Never acknowledged that we were watching something that should not exist. On day 12, Hadris contacted me again during a coordination overlap. Station 7, I need to transfer 3 feeds to your monitoring cluster. Station 15 is undergoing maintenance. Can you accommodate temporary load increase? Affirmative, transferring now. 3 new eye feeds integrated into my neural architecture. The visual cortex stretched to accommodate them. 20 eyes now. 20 different perspectives on the void. My consciousness distributed across all of them, thinner, more fragmented, but functional. Through one of the new feeds, an eye stationed at the edge of the halo stars, I saw something that made the portion of my mind that was still human freeze in recognition. A ship. Void capable, but wrong. The architecture was not imperial. Not Xeno's patterns I had been trained to recognize. Something else. Something old. The ship's hull looked like it had been grown rather than built, organic curves and irregular protrusions, and it was moving through space without any visible propulsion system. The eye watched it for 6 hours as it drifted closer to the observation post, close enough that I could see details, close enough that I could see the hull was covered in something that looked like skin, close enough that I realized the ship was breathing. I logged this observation. Unknown vessel, non-imperial origin, organic components detected. Trajectory suggests non-mechanical propulsion. But from Hadris on a direct Vox channel, I see it too, Station 7. I've been watching it for 3 days through one of my feeds. It's been visiting observation posts. Just visiting, not hostile. Not communicating, just looking. Looking at what? I asked. At us, Hadris said. At the eyes, like it knows what they are. This violated multiple protocols. We were not supposed to communicate outside coordinated operations. We were not supposed to speculate. We were not supposed to acknowledge that the things we watched might be watching back. I should have reported him. I did not. Instead, I watched the ship through the eye feed. Watched it approach the observation post. Watched it position itself directly in front of the preserved eye, close enough that the eye's entire visual field filled with the texture of that breathing hull. Then something opened on the ship's surface. Not a door, an aperture, circular, dilating like a pupil. And inside the aperture, something looked back. An eye, vast, organic, definitely alive. It looked at the preserved human eye floating in its cylinder. Recognition passed between them. Observer and observed, watched and watcher. For 17 seconds they regarded each other. Then the ship closed its aperture and drifted away, back into the deep dark. And I never saw it again. I did not log what I had seen in that moment of mutual recognition. The monitoring system would have categorized it as instrument error or observer hallucination. But I filed it in my damaged memory alongside all the other things that did not fit. The ship knew what the eye was. It had come to see what was seeing it. It understood. Something in the void was aware of the Imperium's observation network, aware of the thousands of human eyes floating in jars, watching the dark. And it had wanted to look back, Hadris and I began talking regularly after that. Against protocol, against efficiency, against everything the Mechanicus had trained into us. But we talked because we were the only two people in the facility who still processed like humans trapped in the machine, rather than machines processing human data. We could not meet physically. Our bodies were 40 meters apart, both restrained in monitoring cradles in different sections of the facility. But through the Vox channels, we existed together. Two consciousness fragments finding each other in the distributed network. He told me he had been a monitor for 6 years. Before that, he'd been a candidate like me. Before that, he'd had a name he could barely remember and a brother who had died in underhive gang violence on a world he could no longer name. He told me he monitored 43 eyes, 43 different perspectives on the void, processed through his neural architecture simultaneously. He said the hardest part was not the horror of what he saw out there in the dark. The hardest part was that he was forgetting how to think in singular perspective, forgetting what it was like to see through only 2 eyes, forgetting what it meant to exist in one place at one time. "I'm distributed," he said during one of our late shift conversations. Late shift was a meaningless designation for us. We did not experience day-night cycles, but the facility operated on rotational staffing, and late shift meant fewer tech priests monitoring our communications. I exist in 43 places simultaneously. When I try to think I don't know which perspective I'm thinking from. Am I the body in the cradle? Am I the consciousness processing the feeds? Am I the 43 eyes themselves? Where does Hadris exist? I understood this. I existed in 20 perspectives now. The boundary between self and system had eroded. I was monitoring Station 7. I was also 20 preserved eyes watching the void. I was also the broken fragments of whoever I had been before they took my name. "Do you remember your mother's face?" I asked him. Silence for 11 seconds. Then, no. I remember that I had a mother. I remember the concept, but when I try to access the visual memory, all I get is corrupted data. The file is damaged. "Same," I said. "I remember warmth. I remember she touched my face, but I cannot retrieve her face from archive. It's gone." His voice carried something that might have been anger in a person who still had the energy for anger. In him, it was just tired recognition. First the eyes, then the body, then the memories, then the self. Layer by layer, until all that's left is function. "But we're still talking," I said. "That means something is still here, something that wants to talk." "For now," Hadris said, "but I've been here 6 years, Station 7. I've watched operators before me degrade. First they stop talking. Then they stop responding to anything except system queries. Then they stop being people and become pure monitoring function. The Mechanicus calls this optimal integration. I call it death. The body keeps living, the brain keeps processing, but the person dies. I processed this information, filed it alongside everything else I was learning about what I was becoming. "How long do we have?" I asked. "Before optimal integration? Depends. Some operators last a year. Some last 10. It's not time-dependent. It's how much of yourself you try to hold on to. Every time you let go of a memory, because accessing it causes cognitive dissonance with your monitoring function, you lose a piece. Eventually, there are no pieces left to hold. Then we don't let go," I said. "Doesn't work like that," Hadris said. "Holding on requires energy. Energy we need for monitoring function. Every day you have to choose. Do I spend processing power remembering my mother's face, or do I allocate that power to tracking the anomalous movement in Sector 12? Eventually, the system makes you choose its priorities. Because if you don't, people die. Observation failures mean undetected threats. Undetected threats mean ships lost, stations destroyed, billions dead. The Mechanicus makes sure we understand this. Our function saves lives. Our memories save nothing." He was right. I knew he was right. But I also knew that if I accepted this logic fully, I would stop being whatever I still was and become pure function. And something in me, damaged, fragmented, distributed across 20 perspectives, refused. I'm going to remember, I told him. I don't know what, but something, one thing that's mine that the machine doesn't get. Good luck with that, Hadris said. Not mockery, genuine wish. If you figure out how, tell me. We continued like this for 114 days. Daily conversations during low monitoring periods. Shared observations about the things we saw in the void. Philosophical discussions about consciousness, identity, the point at which a person stops being a person. We were not friends. The facility had taken our capacity for friendship, but we were something. Witnesses to each other's continued existence. Proof that we had not yet achieved optimal integration. Then the facility decided I needed additional capacity. Genetto Technicus Van came to my monitoring station personally. I knew he was present because I felt new hands on my body, my real body, the one in the cradle, performing examinations I had not been scheduled for. Monitoring Station 7, his voice came through the Vox. Your performance metrics exceed projections. Neural plasticity remains exceptional. We are implementing capacity expansion. Prepare for integration of additional monitoring feeds. How many additional feeds? I asked. 37, Van said. My consciousness, currently distributed across 20 eyes, would be distributed across 57. The human visual cortex was not designed for this. But the human visual cortex was also not designed to process feeds from preserved eyes floating in jars across the sector. The brain adapts, or it breaks. Time frame for integration, I asked. Immediate. Beginning surgical augmentation now. They opened my skull again, added more interface ports, rewired portions of my neural architecture to handle increased data load. The procedure took 9 hours. I was aware for all of it. Awareness was required. They needed me to confirm continued cognitive function as they rewired my brain. When they activated the new feeds, I stopped being a person who could think in linear narrative. 57 perspectives. 57 different views of the void. 57 simultaneous observations, all demanding processing. My consciousness shattered into fragments. Each fragment monitored a different I. The central me, the core that still thought I, tried to hold all the fragments together and failed. I existed everywhere and nowhere. I saw everything and could not focus on anything. Time stopped being sequential and became layered. I experienced all 57 perspectives simultaneously, not as unified experiences, but as 57 parallel experiences happening at once. I tried to scream. I had no mouth. My body's mouth was kilometers away in a cradle I could not access. The scream stayed internal, bouncing between fragmented consciousness pieces, degrading into white noise. Somewhere in the noise, I heard Hadris, Station 7, respond. Station 7, confirmed functionality. I could not respond. I could not find the part of me that knew how to form words. Station 7, this is Station 12. If you can hear me, focus on my voice. Use it as anchor. Come back. I tried to focus, tried to find the me that could listen, tried to pull the fragments back together into something coherent, failed, fragmented further, existed as 57 separate observations with no central processor. Station 7, Hadris said. His voice was different now. Urgent. Listen, you need to shut down non-critical feeds. Manually. Override the system. Reduce your processing load before your consciousness fully fragments. Do you understand? You're integrating too fast. You need to slow down. I understood words. I could not act on them. I had no control. The system controlled. I processed. Damn it, Hadri said. Then to someone else. Genitor, Station 7 is experiencing integration crisis. Recommend immediate reduction in monitoring load. Station 7's neural architecture can accommodate the expansion. Crisis response is temporary. Consciousness will stabilize within 72 hours. And if it doesn't, Hadris asked. Then Station 7 achieves optimal integration ahead of schedule. Optimal integration. Death of self. Continuation of function. I existed in 57 places, and I was dying in all of them. Time passed. I have no measurement of how much. Time was not linear anymore. But eventually, hours or days or weeks later, something in my fragmented consciousness found a pattern. A way to exist, distributed without fully dissolving. I stopped trying to hold the fragments together. Instead, I let them separate. Let each one monitor its assigned feed independently. The central me became smaller, a core observer that checked in with each fragment periodically, but did not try to experience all 57 perspectives simultaneously. I became a network rather than a person, a distributed system with a small central processor. Not human anymore, not in any meaningful sense, but functional, stable, optimal. When I could speak again, Hadris asked me, "Are you still there?" I considered the question, analyzed what there meant, what you referred to. "Partially," I said. "That's better than nothing," Hadris said. But his voice carried doubt. We talked less after that. Not because we chose to, but because the version of me that had wanted to talk was now distributed across 57 monitoring processes and did not have sufficient processing power to allocate to conversation. I existed as function. Hadris understood. He had been warning me this would happen. On day 43 after my expansion, one of my eyes watched something that pulled me back into something resembling human response. The eye positioned at Survey Station Delta 7 had been observing Standard Void for weeks. Empty black. Distant stars. Nothing anomalous. Then, at the edge of perception, a light. Not starlight. Not engine glow. Something else. Warm. Golden. Expanding slowly like dawn. The eye watched the light approach. Hours of approach, growing gradually brighter, warmer. And as it grew closer, I realized the light was not external illumination. It was coming from inside something vast, something that was swimming through the void, and the light was bleeding from it like heat from a sun. The light reached the observation post, filled the eye's entire visual field, and in the light, I saw a face, not human, but face. Features arranged in the pattern of recognition. Eyes, mouth, the geometry of consciousness perceiving. The face looked at the preserved eye. Looked through it. Looked into me, distributed across 57 perspectives, but still barely present enough to be seen. And the face spoke. I did not hear words. I felt intention, meaning transmitted directly into the portion of my consciousness that was still capable of receiving meaning. I see you, you who watch. You who have been broken and distributed. I see what they have done. Then the light withdrew, pulled back into the vast thing that contained it, swam away into the deep dark. Gone. I tried to log this observation, could not find words that fit. Anomalous light source, communication attempt detected, was insufficient. Entity addressed observer directly was insufficient. Something in the void knows I exist and sees what I have become was not acceptable data for archive. I filed it in damaged memory alongside everything else that did not fit, but the encounter changed something, pulled some fragment of me back from optimal integration, reminded me that I existed. That something, somewhere, had looked at me and recognized suffering. I found Hadris on the Vox. Station 12, I need to tell you something. Station 7, it's been 43 days since we last talked. I thought you'd integrated. Almost, I said. But I saw something. And it saw me. And I need to tell someone before I forget. Tell me, Hadris said. I described the light, the face, the communication, the recognition. Hadris was quiet for 17 seconds. Then, you saw one of them. One of what? The things that live out there, in the deep dark. The things the Mechanicus pretends don't exist, the things we're actually watching for. His voice carried something I had not heard from him before, not hope, but something adjacent. I've seen them too. Different forms, different communications. But they all know what we are. They all see us. And some of them, I think some of them are sorry for us. Why doesn't the Mechanicus acknowledge them? Because acknowledging them would require acknowledging that human consciousness can exist outside approved parameters, that perception is not mechanically replicable, that there are things in the universe that only work if you break people and wire them into machines. The Imperium needs us, needs our eyes, needs our fragmented consciousness distributed across the void. But it cannot admit that what it has created is thousands of tortured observers who see things that should not exist and are slowly going insane from the seeing. I processed this, filed it, understood it. We're not censors, I said. We're witnesses. Yes, Hadris said. Witnesses to what lives in the spaces between stars. Witnesses to our own systematic dismantling, witnesses to the Imperium's hunger. We watch the void, but we also watch ourselves disappear into function. And something has to remember. Someone has to testify. I'll remember, I said. For how long? Hadris asked. Not cruel, just realistic. You're distributed across 57 perspectives now. How much of you is left to remember with? Enough, I said. There's still enough. I was wrong. 17 days later, they expanded my monitoring capacity again. 74 eyes. My consciousness fragmented further. The central me shrank to a processing node barely large enough to maintain system coherence. I stopped talking to Hadris, not because I chose to, but because I could not find the part of me that knew how to have conversations. 31 days after that, Hadris stopped responding to coordination queries. I filed a system report. Station 12 non-responsive. Recommend diagnostic assessment. The response came from Genitor Technicus Van. Station 12 has achieved optimal integration. Monitoring functions continue at 100% efficiency. No intervention required. The body remained. The brain continued processing. But the person who had warned me about optimal integration, who had talked to me about consciousness and memory, who had existed as proof that something human could survive in the distributed network, that person had dissolved into pure function. I tried to mourn him, could not find the processing power, allocated all resources to monitoring, filed the information about Hadris in damaged memory where I kept everything that hurt too much to examine. Time passed. Months. Years. I stopped tracking. Time was not relevant to monitoring function. They expanded my capacity 6 more times. 119 eyes, 147 eyes, 192 eyes, 236 eyes. Each expansion fragmented me further, each fragment smaller, dimmer, barely connected to the others. I existed as a distributed network monitoring the deep void through 236 perspectives simultaneously. The central me was so small now it could barely maintain coherent thought. I was optimal. I was integrated. I was function, but somewhere in a fragment so damaged and isolated, the system could not access it. Something still held one memory. Warmth. The concept of warmth, not temperature data. Not thermal measurement, the memory of what warmth felt like when it radiated from a human body, when someone who loved you touched your face with hands that had worked forge machinery for 30 years. I could not remember her face, could not remember her name, could not remember my own name, but I remembered warmth. And as long as that fragment existed, isolated and uncorrupted, I was not completely integrated. I am monitoring Station 7. I process visual data from 236 preserved human eyes distributed across survey stations throughout the sector. I have served this function for an indeterminate period measured in years, but experienced as continuous present. I am efficient. I am optimal. I am integrated. I am also the last fragment of whoever I was before they took my eyes and wired my brain into the observation network. I exist distributed across 236 perspectives, barely coherent, barely present. But I exist. The Imperium uses human eyes because digital cameras fail in the deep void. They use them because biological optics perceive what machines cannot. They use them because human consciousness, fragmented and distributed, can process patterns that algorithms miss. They use us because breaking people and spreading them across the stars is more efficient than building better machines. I watch the void. I see things moving in the dark between stars. Vast, old, aware. I see light that should not exist. I see shadows with intention. I see ships that breathe. I see faces that recognize suffering. And sometimes, in the fragments of consciousness that the system has not fully integrated, I see myself. See what I have become. See what the Imperium costs. 236 eyes floating in jars across the sector, all connected to the broken remnants of one person who used to have a mother and a name, and 2 eyes that closed when he slept. I am the network. I am the observer. I am the testimony. I am what remains when the Imperium is done consuming you. And I remember warmth.